So good morning, everybody. It is 11 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully some more people will trickle in here. My name is Dr. Shannon Creighton. I am the Director of Online Learning at Greenville Technical College. And we are talking about flipped classroom and an online learning format today. Hopefully this will be interactive for you. We will have you turn on your mics and you'll interact with the group a little bit later. But to start with, I just wanted to kind of give some basic understanding of what we're going to do today. So our learning outcomes is after this workshop, you should be able to differentiate flipped classroom concepts from the traditional classroom environment. We want you to be able to discuss the benefits of a flipped classroom, apply different pedagogical strategies to make online classes more engaging. And we want you to be able to integrate some of these best practices into your online classes. So starting with just the basics of a little bit about the flipped classroom approach. In a traditional classroom, the teacher has always been the main focus of learning. They've been the one that have been the expert in the knowledge. They've been the one standing up on the stage, as you see there. The old saying is, sage on a stage, sorry, where professors and teachers think that they are the sole source of information. And if they don't give that information to the students, then students won't get it. It's a very traditional mindset, mentality, and in a postmodern world where we are now with technology and access to internet and things like that, that model just doesn't always work. Students are more savvy, they're more tech savvy, they have access to more information now than they ever have before. So that sage on a stage mentality, it works in some disciplines, but in other disciplines, it has become a little bit archaic, I guess is a good way to say it. Traditionally, the people who present new information through lecture or presentation, standing up in the class, like we see our guy on the screen here, presenting information. And basically, you just guide students through practice activities. That's what the traditional role of a teacher has been. But in a flipped classroom approach, we want to take that and flip it on its head. We want you to go from being sage on a stage, I have a hard time saying that, to a guide on the side. We want students to be able to navigate the waters of learning, and you be the one that guides them to the proper resources, to the right resources, but then also help them to apply, help them to evaluate, help them to create new things together. As you see on our screen here, we've got Bloom's taxonomy, and this is just the traditional model that usually students start their learning at a remember and understand. These are concepts of where students are basically just remembering. They're learning facts. They're being able to piece small things together. But this is very, very basic information. Then they take that information and apply it to something. I'm a baker, I'm a cook, and so I always like to kind of look at this in a way you look at a recipe. Remembering is just that, can I remember the recipe? Can I remember the steps? Can I remember what goes into it? Understanding is I start to know that if I'm going to bake a cake, that I'm going to need flour and eggs, or those kinds of things. Applying it is be able to look at the recipe and say, I can follow these steps. It is I'm starting to do something with it, but I still need a lot of hand-holding and guidance. Analyzing means that I can start looking at a recipe and think, oh man, I can change this, or I can do this. I know how to look at a recipe and think if I will like it or not. Evaluate and create is that now I know the concept of why you put in eggs and why you put in chocolate and why you do this, and I can start making my own recipes out of it. In a traditional classroom, we've put students coming to class and learning, and we give them the understand and remember. We give them a bunch of facts, we give them a bunch of dates, we give them a bunch of definitions and concepts in class, and then we give them homework assignments for them to go home and apply it and create and do things on their own. The flipped classroom takes that model and flips it completely upside down and says, we need to spend more time in class on helping students analyze and create and evaluate. So we give them the homework assignments, then become go learn this concept, go interact with this resource, go interact with this YouTube video. Very similar to what I did when I sent out the video for you guys to watch in the beginning, was I want you to become familiar with this concept first, so that when we get into an online setting like this, number one, you already have a base level understanding of what we're talking about. And then number two, it makes the conversations more full, because now if you are a more introverted person that likes to take time and process and think through things, you've already had that time to do that while you're interacting with the material outside of class, so that when you get into the classroom setting, we can have more full conversations. We can have better conversations, because we can start talking about, now that you understand this management concept, let's put it in a real world context, and me as the guide can help you take those things you remember and understand, and now to start applying it to the material. So we've taken the traditional model and basically just flipped it upside down, so that our classroom time is reserved for creating and evaluating and analyzing, and we allow the students to do the understanding and remembering outside of class. So this is where we come in with the flipped classroom. So what is a flipped classroom? It's a pedagogical approach where students first explore new course content outside of the class before they come in and sit in a lecture or a classroom setting. In-class time is then used for student engagement, inquiry, and assessment. They grapple with, apply, and elaborate on course concepts. We do collaborative coursework, and especially in an online format like this, breakout rooms in Zoom, or smaller meeting spaces, or you meeting with smaller groups of students and allowing them to work together, that still brings the concept of being together in a class, but it still allows them to do that at a distance. So if students have interacted with that material and they have a base level understanding when they come into the class, it helps the students be able to grapple with those things better when it becomes application in your class. And you don't ask the students to do higher level order things on their own. You are actually there with them to help guide them through the process of how to apply and how to use critical thinking skills, because they already have that base level of knowledge when they come into your class. It's a great way to set up active learning. There's all kinds of studies and research around students in online classes need active learning. They need participation. They need things to do. They need real world applications. And you can bring in case studies. You can bring in problem sets. You can bring in structured discussions when you know that a student's come into your class with a certain base level understanding. So you don't have to waste your time on those lower, I don't want to say waste your time, but you don't have to use your time on giving them a bunch of facts and things to remember. This way you can have them start applying the things that they have already interacted with previously to your class. So active learning, Michael Prince defines the active learning as any instructional method that engages student in the learning process. The sage on a stage mentality is a very passive way of learning for the student. It is, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen to you talk, and I'm going to absorb the information that you're giving me. It's very passive. It's easy for students to tune you out after a while. It's easy for them not to pay attention to you. It's easy for them to hear it once and then it fall right out of their ears by the time they get home to do the practice problems. The flipped classroom is made up of two components. One component requires human interaction, the in-class activities, and the second component is that autonomous.
Use the muscles, girl. You gotta use the muscles
outside of class.
No.
So in this approach, it is autonomous, and the fact is that you give students some choice in how they interact with the material. We as educators know that not all students learn in the same way. They don't have the same learning styles.
Give me something for my booms.
Hold on a second, let's see if I
Yeah.
can mute this person. There we go. So it does give the student a little more choice, and it gives them some ownership of their education. And it's not so, and our teaching becomes not so strict that you have to learn it my way or the highway, or you have to do this. It's guiding students in the right direction and allowing them to have some choice and some freedom to interact with the material as they see fit. Some students may read a textbook and be able to absorb the information and fine. Some students may need to watch some YouTube videos. Some students may need to interact with some practice problems. This style of learning allows students to interact with the material in a way that suits them best. It doesn't force a one-size-fits-all mentality where we expect all students to be able to learn in the same way. It does give them some choice. And that was one of the things that came up in the video that I sent you guys, was that students can actually guide their learning and have some choice in about how they learn. And they can also find some things that interest them more than what your lecture may. So learning as a process, active learning as a process, you go with experiencing, reflecting, thinking, acting. We want to make sure that students move through all 4 quadrants of this learning model, that we want them to experience the material. We want them to be able to go out into the world and see the real world stories that apply to your global warming class or your mechatronics class or your aviation class. How does that apply to the real world? And then we want them to reflect on that experience. One of the most valuable, deep learning experiences that you can have is having students reflect on what they learned and why it applies and how it applies to them, and allow them to reflect. I think so many times as educators, we miss this step of reflecting. We expect students just to regurgitate back to us the information that we gave them, whether it's a multiple choice exam or a true false exam or a fill in the blank. That doesn't really allow students to reflect back on their education experience and why they learned. We also need them to start thinking about things. We don't need them to just, again, regurgitate things. We need to know that they can apply things. I was working with a faculty member of mine whose final exam was 120 multiple choice questions over the course of the entire class. And they were questions the students hadn't seen before. And so, you know, we're asking a student to remember 120 pieces of little information instead of saying, can you take this material and apply it to a real world setting? And especially in a community college and a technical college setting like we are, we've got adults who have experiences in the real world, and we should use those. We should say, you learned this concept in our class that you interacted with. How can you find a time in your working career or your life where you had to use this? Could you have done it better? Could you have done it worse? You know, have them reflect and think about it. And then we want them to go out and do something. We want them to be active with it. It's not enough for students just to know the concepts, but can they actually put it to practice? If you're teaching them, you know, another faculty member of ours, we're talking about math, and all of their class was, here's the equation, go figure it out. And they said, how can we make this more active? And I said, have them apply it to something. Don't just give them the equation. You know, go back to the old word problems of, you know, if I'm earning this amount per hour, how much money would I need to make to get this? And actually put it in a context of something that concept in math, you would actually apply it to something. So having the students do something with it that relates to their future career, their past experiences, that experiential learning that we talk about from Kolb's experiential learning theory, is be able to take new information and link it to an existing piece of knowledge that they have. And studies show that students learn at a deeper level and retain that information at exponentially more if they can take the concept that you're teaching them and apply it and relate it to something they already have experienced. So the benefits of a flipped classroom is, number one, you have more individualized help during class time. So if a student has gone and experienced and watched YouTube videos and experienced the textbook and the interactive problems and things like that, then you come to class and a student can have very specific questions that they may have problems with. Maybe during the process of solving this algebra equation, they get stuck at this this point every time, and they can ask you more targeted questions and get more targeted help in the time they need it. There's more opportunities for deliberate practice and increased student support. There's more opportunities for students to interact with their instructor and their peers. In communications, we always talk about that you need to have a shared frame of reference, that everybody, to have a full conversation, we all have to agree on what certain terms and certain words mean. If I say something is very large, that may mean one thing to me, but Mary Helen may think that very large means something completely different. Or I may say I had a lot of money and my job makes a lot of money. My ton of money or a lot of money may be different for me than it is for somebody who grew up in a different socioeconomic. So allowing students to have a common frame of reference by allowing them to come into the class with a certain base level understanding helps us to communicate better, because we all know when I say the word management or leadership or whatever it is, we have a common frame of reference and we can have a better, more deep conversation, because we don't have to stop to make sure people understand when I say leader, this is what I mean, or when I say manager, this is what I mean, because we've already experienced that outside of the class, and we can take that as our base level and jump off from there instead of trying to use our class time to bring everybody up to the same level. Students control the pace of the lectures. So if you get into a class and students have, done this homework outside of class and they come to class and you've got this whole lecture plan or these whole activities planned, and you realize, man, students just didn't grasp this at the level I wanted them to, you can adjust it down to where they are. Or on the flip side, if you come to class and you try to do an activity and everybody's just flying through it and going through it, you know that you can adjust that to be even a deeper conversation, or change the case study to ask deeper questions, so you can tailor the learning experience for the students based on where they are. And it gives you that flexibility because you're not stuck to a PowerPoint lecture or a textbook outline or whatever, because they've already done that. So you can tailor the class to where your particular class is, even down to the student level. And sometimes resiliency. So we all went through the pandemic. We all moved our classes online very quickly. And what I've seen in my director role here in online learning is that faculty members just simply took their face-to-face class and moved it online, and their lectures in class then became Zoom meetings, or then became Microsoft Team meetings, or became Google Meets, whatever platform you're using, and expected students to keep up in the same level as they did before. But now you've added distractions, you've added kids, you've added other spouses, you've added other animals, you've added everything else into the equation. So it necessitates that we as online instructors also change and adapt the way we're teaching. So God forbid that COVID, picks up and we have to go back online. A flipped classroom approach like this allows you the flexibility to not just be sitting behind a computer and doing Zoom lessons and Zoom instructions and Zoom lectures. You can do some group projects, you can do some group work, you can do some case studies together. So it gives you the resiliency to be able to move modalities if you need to. And students are more prepared for in-class discussions. This past semester, I taught an intro to management class, and we used McGraw-Hill Connect resources. And the way the traditional class had been set up was you would come to the live Zoom lecture, I would go over the PowerPoint slides, and then you would go home and do the McGraw-Hill Connect assignments. In class discussions were very minimal. Students weren't interacting. It just was over their head. It was overwhelming, so much information. So this past semester, I took and flipped that on its head. So I said, go interact with chapter 1 material in McGraw-Hill first. And then when we come to class, we're going to discuss how that management theory applied to your real life. I saw students interacted with me more. They interacted with each other more. I saw that they were having deeper discussions about things that I hadn't even considered, and they're bouncing ideas off of each other because they already had that base level of understanding. In an online class of 10 people, they set up their own study group. They created this bond amongst them because we were able to facilitate discussions in class where they felt like they were connected to each other and to me as the instructor. And I have not been able to attain that level of interactivity until I flipped the classroom and was able to foster better communication and better discussions in my online class. So that's just a personal experience that I saw, and why I'm really kind of passionate about the flipped classroom approach is because I've seen it work and I know that it works. Some more benefits. The benefits of flipped classrooms are due in part to the incorporation of in-class activities, collaboration, active learning, which we know we've been shown to enhance student learning. Instead of being passive recipients of knowledge, students will become active participants in their own education. Again, it's that passive knowledge versus active knowledge. If we're just simply sitting back watching a lecture, then students are not going to retain that information at the same level as if they get in and actually start doing something with it. And a flipped classroom also been shown to improve exam results, student engagement, and teacher-student communications. I have tons of research studies that prove this. So if you want that, send me an email after this and I can share some of those resources with you. But there's this concept has been studied in a traditional classroom, and we're just taking that and applying it into an online format. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. It is, I mean, now that we've gone back to some in-person meetings, people flock to those in-person meetings. Zoom fatigue is real. What do I mean by that? Is people are tired of being, of sitting back passively listening to presentations like I'm doing right now. There's been so many webinars, so many conferences, so many classes. People are just tired of Zoom. They're tired of being passive listeners of Zoom. And I get faculty members call me all the time to say, Dr. Creighton, how do I get the students engaged in class? I'm there, I'm lecturing, and they don't have their cameras on, they're not chatting, they're not talking, they're not doing anything. It's because they're tired. They're tired of the Zoom fatigue. So a way to break that up is to have them to interact with each other. Is to eliminate the Zoom hour-and-a-half lecture or 2-hour lecture. I had one class that was a 4-hour lecture once a week. It's just too much without students having to do something or needing to do something or interacting with the material itself. So Zoom fatigue is real, and this is one way that we can make the class more interactive and make the students feel more comfortable interacting in an online environment. Again, in my introverted friends, sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to process information. And those are extroverts like me. I can hear a piece of information and I can talk about it and I can talk all day about it. But some of my, my partner and some of my friends are more reserved and need some time to process and think about the information before they are able to piece it together and bring out thoughts. So again, flipped classroom is also a more inclusive way to teach that can eliminate some of this Zoom fatigue. In distance learning, we build on and improve your relationships with your students as the teacher and student dynamics shift from a less instructional model to a more collaborative one. Again, I don't sit behind a computer screen and lecture you all day, but I give you some activities to do so that you can engage with what I'm talking about. It's more dynamic, more engaging, and you engage students on a higher level by encouraging creativity and evaluation rather than basic knowledge and recall. You can also use pre-made resources, OER resources like Merlot and OpenStax and TED Talks and NPR. These are all great resources for you to put out there for your student to interact with before they ever come to your class. Lumen Learning has a great resources. Merlot, even YouTube for that matter, has a great resources that are pre-made and free for you to use to bring into your classes that don't cost the student any extra money, and helps you as a faculty member not to need to create things from ground up all the time, but take advantage of some of the expertise and the research that other people have done that can incorporate quickly into your class. So, have them do that. And a lot of our faculty members are using the McGraw-Hill Connects and the Pearson MyLab and Cengage MindTap and those kinds of things. Those are great materials, but that should not be the only thing that's in your class. Have them interact with that material first and then come to class and discuss what they did and discuss what stuck out to them and what made them want to keep studying or what do they want to study more in the future, and allow them to customize the class a little bit to themselves. So there's a couple different styles. Selected content flipping means that be selective and strategic about what you record for students to watch in advance. Like I said, there are some concepts that students find complicated. Some of our more advanced classes, our advanced math classes or science classes, some of that material is hard. So allowing them to have a certain base level and then you come to class and can build on that, it helps the students. So you can be selective. You don't have to flip your entire class. You can and flip certain aspects of your class or certain certain activities or certain content in your class. You can start there if you don't feel comfortable flipping the whole thing. Reserve some of your class time for lecturing on advanced topics. If you know that students are going to struggle with, inorganic chemistry, reserve some of your class time to go over really complicated materials. Or if you're teaching an advanced calculus class, take some time to work out some problems together. But have the students have that baseline of knowledge before they come in first. Consider recording lectures that cover content that's likely to be reusable in future semesters. Take some time to open up your Zoom room without anybody else in it and give a 5 or 10 minute talk that goes through slides, or break out your whiteboard and work out some problems. Record that and then post it in the class. If you feel the need to put your spin on things, that's fine. Just give it to the students in advance. And the great thing about that is if you create the video one time, you can save it and use it in future classes. So it kind of, your library of resources builds on itself. Use 8 to 12 minute videos. Don't go an hour and a half, 2 hour long in a video. That's too long. Students lose engagement. Give it to them in short chunks so that they can watch part of this, interact with it, and then come back and watch another chunk of it. Don't expect students to be able to sit in front of their computer screens and listen to a faculty member talk on and on and on about any subject, for a certain period of time, because you lose interest. And as the video goes on, students retain that information less and less as the video goes along. So break it up into smaller chunks. And always, like I said earlier, always provide a reflection activity, whether it's a discussion board, an in-class discussion, and always give them a low stakes memory activity. What do I mean by that? Give them a way to prove that they have learned the facts, they have learned the information that's necessary, but give them a practice quiz that they can take multiple times. Give them a matching test that has that's worth a small percentage of their grade. Allow them to practice their memory to make sure they understand where they need to be before they come to class. But it's always great to scaffold our assignments so that we start out with low stakes things that allow students to remember and understand things, and then move them along the spectrum to applying and evaluating and creating later on. But always, classes should always build their assessment. So you start with something low stakes, like a multiple choice quiz that's maybe 10 questions that they can take multiple times, then moving that into discussions and case studies, and eventually, creating something in the end. So be able to move them through that spectrum of scaffolded assignments. Flipping without recording lectures. Not everybody likes to sit on a camera and record PowerPoints and things like that. Find other ways for students to get the content that you might normally give in a lecture. It could be readings, it could be their textbook, it could be news articles, it could be OER resources that you found. Give them PowerPoints, even if it's a publisher created PowerPoint, give that to the students. You can do voiceover PowerPoint and allow students to hear what you're talking about. You can assign them podcasts. I remember I was teaching an international business class, and I heard a podcast in NPR that talked about some situations in Brazil that I thought was relevant, interesting. So I gave them the podcast and asked them to write a reflection and then come to class, and we talked about what surprised you about this. Find videos, find pre-created videos on YouTube or TED Talks or those kinds of things, or LinkedIn Learning if you have access to that. And then always feel free to use publisher created material. I'm not saying McGraw-Hill and all those things are bad. I'm just saying they need to be used properly. They are one tool in our tool belt as instructors, but they should not be the only tool that we use in a class. And again, I can't stress this enough. We need to scaffold our assignments so that students can move from basic understanding into a more full application and creating in the end. So logistics, how do you do it? You can do Zoom breakout rooms, which we're going to do in just a minute. You can have polls. You can have shared documents that you work on together, through OneDrive or Google Drive. You can use group activities. You can use collaborative case studies of where you use breakout rooms and give them a case and come back and say, okay, how would your group have solved this? How would your group have solved this? And then have them discuss. You can have in-class debates. I used to love when I was more in the classroom that I would give a debate assignment where I would divide the teams and give them the side of the argument that they had to argue, whether it was healthcare, should it be socialized healthcare, or or not, or should we? I even did Uber drivers versus taxi drivers, and I divided the class up. So you may have been put on the side of the debate that you didn't necessarily agree with, but you had to argue against it. So it helped with critical thinking skills. You can do seminars. You can do all kinds of things that are not just listening to you and reading a PowerPoint. So best practices, if you use videos, aim for multiple short videos rather than one long video. Complement your videos with guiding questions. Tell them in the introduction, make sure you pay attention to X or Y or Z in this, or, you're really going to need to know this in future lessons. Make sure there's an interactive element. If you're using Panopto or Kaltura, do the pop-up quizzes right in the middle of the video and have students do that. Or have a reflection question at the end, have reflective components. Don't just expect them to watch it and absorb it, but ask them some questions, ask them to reflect on what they had just done. Use formative assessments. Develop low-stakes assignments to encourage self-reflection and analysis before they come to the live class. Be intentional with your content. Carefully choose how you present your material, and carefully choose what asynchronous learning content you actually use. It's not enough to ask a student to watch pre-recorded lecture videos. The content needs to be interesting and interactive, and just because a video exists does not mean that it is the best video for the student to watch. So, pre-screen the materials that you're asking the students to watch. And if you're bored by it, the students are going to be bored by it. So find find some interactive ways to do it, or create your own content. Students love to hear from their faculty members. Reading student end of course surveys, they said, I didn't feel like I was a person, or I felt like this was impersonal. So if there's a way that you as the instructor can have you on video talking directly to your students, it adds that human element that we've all been missing for the past year and a half. So there is a way to humanize our online classes, and this is a great way to do it by being able to have better discussions in your classes. Be sure to clearly explain to your students the course structure, because this might be new for students. Students may not have interacted with classes this way in the past. They may be accustomed to the traditional model of education. So in your first class, in your first live class, in your syllabus, in your first announcement, make sure that you explain to them how this class works. Make sure you give them expectations for their in-class activities and also their out-of-class activities. Explain to them the benefits of student learning, how this can affect them, how this is good for them. Always make sure you're very clear on how they're going to be graded. A best practice with this is to have an element of class participation as a part of your grade, which encourages students to actually interact, and tell them how they're going to be graded on that. Also, another best practice, especially for adult learners, is tell them how this course leads to the learning outcomes. Here are the things that you are expected to know when you leave here. Here's how this activity feeds into that. It gives them a sense that you're not having them just do busy work, but it helps them connect the activities and the learning that you're doing to what they're expected to learn, expected to do, and be able to apply it into their lives. Also, then explain how those learning outcomes fit into their lives. A lot of times, how many times in a math class did you sit in algebra and say, I'm never going to use this in my life. I'm never going to need to know this. But if you as the instructor can say, hey, you're going to need, calculus when you look at, optimizing profits in your business. Oh, well, now I need to pay attention to this, because at some point I want to be a business owner, and I might need to know what that break-even point is, or what the top of the cost parabola is, and I need calculus to do that. It now awakens in the student that they need to pay attention to this, because it's going to affect something that they do in the future. And if students can't see that link, they're less likely to engage in the material in a deep fashion. So best practice is to make sure that learning outcomes are framed in a way that helps the students see the value of them moving forward. And that's in a flipped classroom. And that's also just in a traditional classroom, is to make sure that you do that as well. So there is a caveat. Remote collaborative learning activities take a little more thought and a little more time and a little more preparation. I'm not going to sit here and say that that it's not. We did a faculty survey over the fall and spring, and it was funny to see how many faculty members wrote back, I didn't realize how much time it was going to take to teach an online class. And they thought it was going to be like walking into a class and just winging it and talking because they know their material. But then they stepped in the world of online learning and realized there was more to it than just being able to pull something out of your back pocket and use it. So, planning for this and using a flipped classroom approach will take some more time. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's not. But once you do it, it is so much more rewarding for you as a faculty member because you get to see your students engage in the material that you find interesting, and also helps them engage with each other. It is very rewarding, but I will tell you that it does take a little bit more time to plan those activities and to pick out the resources and to figure out what assignments and what discussions you're going to have in class. So I will make that caveat. I'll be, completely honest about that. So we want to, oh no, that's not the right one. Goodness. Let me stop sharing for a second. I had an activity planned at the end. So Mary Helen, you're still on, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So now, so here it is. Here it is. So Mary Helen and I, Mary Helen is the director. Are you director of online learning, or what's your title there?
Director of the Center for Teaching Excellence now.
At Midlands Tech. And she and I have had many conversations together, and we work closely on our distance education peer group. And she brought up the concept of something that she found interesting, which is the question formulation technique, which I thought was, I didn't know what it was at first when she said it. And then I did some homework and actually really liked the concept. So do you mind just giving a brief introduction as to what that concept is?
Sure. So the question formulation technique is got a lot of science behind it. It was developed over the course of decades. They spent about 7 years coming up with a few steps that are involved in it. But it's really designed to empower students to learn to ask deeper, more probing questions about anything. It's designed to develop their own skills in asking really engaging questions. And essentially, you take a backseat role in this. Your big challenge is designing a prompt. And it's really designed to sort of create an equitable question space. So you guys know that students come to class, some come to your classroom experienced in discussions, experienced in question asking. Some of them come from less prepared backgrounds and they're not as comfortable, so they're quiet, or they've been taught that their questions are stupid or whatever. This is really designed to put everybody on a level playing field. The first part of it is all you do is ask questions. You give the students a prompt. It's not a question. It's a statement. It's an image. It's a primary source document, whatever you want. But you show it to the students, and then they take so many minutes to ask every question they can think of about this particular thing. And they work in groups to do this. So they're triggering each other, asking questions. The rule is, though, nobody can pose an answer to any of those questions. You write every question down exactly as it's asked. And then once you've done that, you go back and you change the statements into questions. Because some don't wear along. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say I said we're talking about the causes of the Civil War. And a student might say, well, they didn't like slavery. That's a statement. They're saying it is if maybe that was a question, but we want them to reword it because we want them to get in the practice of forming that as a question. So was it that they didn't like slavery? Was that a major cause, as opposed to that hesitant posting? So we're teaching them to ask these questions. The next piece of it is you introduce students to the concept of open and closed-ended questions. And it's really important to kind of talk about that, because when students come to this, a lot of times they think that closed-end questions are bad and open-ended are good, but it's not really a good or bad. It's when do you need what kind of question? So what we ask them to do is go through that list of questions that they created and numbered and say, okay, which ones are open and which are closed? Then we have them go back and pick one open-ended to turn into a closed-ended and one closed to turn into an open-ended. And the purpose of this is to really force them to engage with their questions and say, okay, what kind of information am I looking for? And what's the best way to get this information, open or closed? Then the last step is really a prioritization step, which seems simple, except that prioritization is really a higher order thinking skill. I mean, it's challenging to take a lot of things and say, okay, what's the most important? This is where you as the instructor really guide this, because when you tell them how to prioritize, so let's say your focus is on symbols, symbolization of something. You might say, select the top 3 questions most likely to help you learn more about the symbolic nature of this event. Or put a star next to the 3 questions most likely to help you complete your research, or whatever. Then everybody comes back together and they share their questions with one another. The thing here is, and the real purpose of this is, rarely do students find that the questions that are most helpful to them are the first, or even in the first 4 or 5. The really good questions typically come much later in their thought processes as they're exploring. And that's what you want them to do here. You want them to learn to dig deeper, to learn that the more you engage with a thought, the fuller your thinking becomes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got a few minutes. We've got 8 minutes. So I would like for us to practice doing this. This is going to be a very condensed version of this. So our topic is going to be methods to inspire students in an online class format. And this goes with the YouTube video that I sent out to you guys before. So I am going to break you out into 5 breakout rooms real fast. So you need a scribe, and your job is to just list as many questions as you can about what the methods to inspire students to learn in an online class format. Ask any questions that you want to know the answers to, things you want to look at into the future. No bad questions. Don't answer questions. Your job is to simply list out as many questions as you can think of, and I'll give you about 3 minutes in the breakout rooms to do that, and I'll bring you back. So scribe and write down as many questions as you can real fast. Okay, I'm going to assign you automatically now, and open all rooms. Okay, you should get the invitation to join your breakout room. All right, so we have everybody back in our room. So the next step would be to categorize your questions into closed-ended, open-ended, and then change one-to-one. Just for the time of sake, I'm going to assume that everybody in this group knows closed-ended versus open-ended. So we're going to skip that step for now and go straight to the prioritization. So I'm going to put you back into your rooms, and I want you to pick the top 3 questions out of your group that you think is the most important thing to know about engaging students or inspiring students in an online format. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do that. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and set this up so I don't have to remember to do it. 103, okay. And I'm going to open your rooms back up. And again, prioritize 3 questions that you think are the most important. All right, so it looks like we've got everybody back in the main room. So just for the sake of time, we only have 1 minute left. So what you would do then is take those questions, have the groups go around and share their 3 questions, talk about why they're important. So that would end the activity. But then what do you do with those questions? So you could take those questions and say, okay, now take those 3 questions from your group, go and research them and try to find the answer to those questions. And we'll come back next class and have you talk about what you found. It gives the students feel like they help guide the discussion, they help come up with the questions, and then that guided their research and the discussions in the next class. You could use those as essay questions, you could use those as final exam questions, you could use those as essays, you could use them for live lectures. If the student finds a question that they can't find the answer to, maybe you as the faculty member can help guide them to resources. So it becomes this whole self-guided flipped classroom approaches. Now you're not the one up on the stage saying these are the 10 things that are most important things to know about this subject. You allow the students to spark their curiosity and help them go out and find the resources to answer their own questions, and then come back and present that to the class. So you don't become the sage on the stage, you now become the guide on the side, because you help them formulate good questions, good valid research questions that they can then go out and help find the answers to and bring those back to your class and discuss them or use them as an assessment or use them as a discussion or research project, things like that. So this was a real brief example of how you could take a class and flip it on its head and make it into something different than the traditional classroom. I was hoping that I would have some time for questions, but I think we've run out of time. Again,
I want to ask, I'm going to jump in, Shannon, because I do want to ask a quick question before they leave, even though we're at the last minute. What was the hardest thing for you when you went into that room? What was the hardest thing for you to do when he first sent us into the room? How many of you tried to have discussions rather than just ask each other questions? Did all of you go in and only ask questions, or did you go into those groups and make suggestions, answer, share stories?
We went
that-
in and asked questions.
Typically, one of the things students find most difficult, and the same thing we do, is answering questions without providing answers. Because we know the answers and sometimes we want to jump in. That's where the equity comes in, is when you set it so that all students are only asking questions. There are no good or bad questions. They're just effective and less effective questions. And that's the real challenge of this, is getting them, reminding them questions only, and that we don't ask questions for them. We have them ask the questions.
Yeah.
There's some really good stuff on this technique, and it is super powerful if you guys are interested in checking it out.
Yeah. If you are, Google search it or reach out to Mary Helen or myself. And again, this is just one brief example of how you could take a classroom and flip it and give the students some more choice. It is not the only way. It is just one way that I wanted to show you guys here. So again, thank you for being a part of this group. I really appreciate it. We're very excited about this conference that we have, and look forward to sending out the recordings of this. And again, reach out to me directly if you have any questions. So with that, I will stop the recording. Thank you very much.
What's the topic?